pleasure to welcome you. This is third time lucky. These guys don't need to know. It's a pleasure to be here in the London Art Bar. This is the first podcast that we have done face to face, and it is such a pleasure to be here. Now, I would do you a disservice if I introduced you, so please tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about you.
Well, thank you very much for coming to see me, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part. It's really exciting and flattering. So my name's Gareth. I am one of the founders of a company called PopUp Painting, and essentially what we do is sip and paint events, painting and wine experiences, which are all about unleashing creativity, wine glass in one hand, paintbrush in the other. And a key part of that, and a key, relevant to where we are now, is that in the middle of the pandemic, we opened a bar in central London, the London Art Bar, which is a home for us, and, a coffee shop, a bar, comedy space, all sorts of different stuff. So there's a really interesting story that, the company's been through, and hopefully it's something that people find interesting. So thank you very much for coming along.
Brilliant. And it's such a fantastic space. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will have a panoramic view of different bits of your space, because it is beautiful. What you've done with the space is truly incredible. You've got obviously a very interesting story. We'll talk a little bit later in the podcast around how you were expanding at the time when the pandemic came. But let's go right back to the beginning. So tell us about Pop-Up Painting, how it came about.
So I think the key thing to know about the founders of the company, so myself and Felissa, is that neither of us have got any art experience whatsoever. When we started the company, I was just finishing a degree in history and politics. Felissa was just leaving a job in health service management. We had not considered ourselves arty people, but this whole sip and paint concept, of which pop-up painting is part, has been really big in America since about 2008, 2007. And a friend who was in America said, there's this thing in America, it's the sip and paint business. It's great fun. Why don't you try it in the UK? I think a UK audience would really like it. And we were a little bit hesitant. We thought, well, is this really what we want to do? It's so different to what we've done before. But in the end, we concluded, well, it's either going to work or not. We're either going to like it or not. And we've got to do something. So it may as well be this idea that has presented itself. So we decided that it was worth a try, as so many things are. So we flew out to America in February 2013 to go to a paint night event in Boston, Massachusetts. And we were slightly apprehensive. The picture was a wine bottle with a cork popping out the top of it. Not my design of choice. But we were really pleasantly surprised at how enjoyable it was. It was really good fun. And there was lots that we thought, well, if we did it our own version, we would add a few twists to it. So we did. And that April 2013, we launched in the Soho Hotel, which was very glitzy and far glitzier than we are now. I know. So we launched, we had 30 or 40 people come along, and we got lots of feedback. We learned what worked well and what didn't. Lots of it did work well. We were really pleased, and we put a lot of thought into, what changes would we make. So the key things that we did that made us different to the US experience, and we thought, that UK people are very picky, so we have to have this refined product. So we focused on masterpieces and recognizable landmarks and skylines, whereas in America, far more sort of, and I mean this in a nice way, sort of greeting cardsy, where actually it's a relatively generic image, which is fine, still great fun to do. But we thought, well, we want something that someone's going to book that, come along and say, I love that, I'm going to hang that on my wall, I'm really proud of that. So Van Gogh's Starry Night, Glimpse the Kiss, Monet's Water Lilies, just obvious classics like that. And then a few more original and sort of more modern things as well. So we added that, and then we added music. So as a key themed element, and that was what was really important to us, that they were themed experiences. It wasn't just a painting, it was a social event. It was a painting party. So we added these twists, and we went from there. So April 2013 the start, and we gradually built up over the years, up to in 2019 at our busiest, we were running about 80 or 90 events a month, which was very hard work. And we gradually built up over the years, sort of building up to it. But, we started off just one event in April, 2 or 3 events in June, 6, 7, 8 events a month built up over the year. So very, very gradual story.
And this is what I really like. You've grown gradually, you've iterated over time, because often in the media we see sort of the two ends of the spectrum, right? The people hustling in their garage 22 hours a day, sleeping under their desk, and then suddenly they're Ben Francis at this Gymshark HQ and they've got 50,000 employees. But what you've done is you've gradually iterated over time. So the people might be surprised to learn that your background is not businessy at all. It's history and politics degree. So how have you found being an entrepreneur when ostensibly your background doesn't align?
Yeah, well, I suppose that's true for quite a lot of people that start businesses. You have to start a business at some point, and you're new to everything you do, aren't you? So I suppose that there's two prongs to that. So first of all, Felissa has got experience, building health service businesses, new ideas, new developments, lots of innovation. She was director of innovation, all sorts of different places. So we did have that up our sleeve, which is an enormous asset, obviously. But I think there is a misconception that politics and business are completely different, and I think that's not accurate to my experience of it. And so I think the thing that political campaigning, the study of politics, in my master's, when it was a political economy master's, looking at voter coalitions, interests, median voter, that sort of stuff. Actually, it's all about what people want and taking a deep and serious interest in what people want and then what they do. So I think when you look at politics as a study of what people do and what their values are and what their preferences are, they look really similar. So I think, a good political campaign, a good business campaign, a good campaign of any kind knows what its values are, and what is the product, what is the message, what's the core of it, and then it identifies who is the key voter, key group of voters, key group of customers. And for us, that's something that we've always been pretty robust on. It's one of my absolute points of dogmatism, that we've got this particular customer in mind. It's a young professional woman, 25 to 45, obviously not completely dogmatic on what year, if you're 46, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you sort of start with the character, essentially, who doesn't exist. And, so for us, it was always someone that hasn't really painted before. They're looking for a new experience. So we start with this character, and then you focus on what they want. What are the things that they like? Where can you meet them where they are, and go from there? And actually, I've just remembered, I think a lot of this came from when I did a GCSE in drama. Yeah. Actually, really useful. So I can really remember, going over a play or a story or whatever, and gingerbread figures. And on the inside, it's what they think about themselves and what their interests are. And on the outside is how people see them and what they do. So you just do that. So it's just like that. And I think that's a great technique for whatever you're doing. Yeah. So this focus on a person and what their interests are is the thing that ties that together, I think.
I think this is great advice for anybody who's watching or listening at home, who's thinking about starting the business, is that most people start with the concept, but what you're starting with is the customer. And unless you build that profile of the customer and you get it quite specific and quite niche, you end up trying to appeal to so many people, nobody buys your stuff. And it comes back to one thing we were talking about on the second version of this recording, was around analyzing the competition. So many people get stuck in competitor analysis. What are the competition doing? And ignoring who is the customer that is purchasing the competition's product, and what are they missing from that experience that I can actually fill in. Is it a competitor or is it a complementer? What are some of the lessons you've kind of learned through iterating and growing pop-up painting, both in this area and more generally?
So that's a really interesting question. I think competition is a really good thing. I think if you're in an environment or a market where there are no competitors, that should really alarm you, particularly in a sector like this. Actually, barriers to entry are relatively low. If you're really going to town on it, you might spend £500 on a kit, which is doable. You could save up, spend £500 and just get started. You can really, really do this easily compared to lots of other places. There aren't huge legal complexities, etc. So it is a low barrier to entry environment. And our approach has always been that this is a novel concept-ish, less novel now, but still most people have never done this. They've never heard of it. The more people entering the market raising awareness, the better. And I think one of the things that's really nice about this whole environment, you know, the creative economy, experience economy, is that someone coming to one event doesn't mean they're not going to come to another. It's actually, you know, the more you do, the more you're going to do. And, you know, while we'd love to be everyone's favorite, we know that actually you might be looking for slightly different things. And lots of companies do have slightly distinct focuses. So people will find one that really suits them, or they'll try different things for what they want. And I think that's a really good thing. And obviously, competitor analysis is a really good thing to do, so long as it is analysis where it's like, okay, what does the market look like? Where are people going? What do they like and what do they not like? What are our strengths and weaknesses? What are the opportunities and threats? Really thinking about that with other people in the market. But it's really important that you're competing for a customer's attention. You're not like trying to be better than the other company, because everyone's got their own strengths, their own weaknesses. That's fine. It all meshes together in terms of what people want, and that's a good thing. And I think one of the things, particularly in a small business, you know, you can feel quite territorial. Particularly if one of the things that I found is actually people that join our team become really territorial. It's not something that, so I've been quite, you know, stoic about, you know, competition. Like, it's a good thing ultimately. It's a great thing. It's exciting. It shows energy. But people on our team can sometimes be very territorial, which is great fun. And actually, it's not, you can't obsess over the competition. You have to obsess over your customer. So, you know, and I think particularly, this is a very visual industry. So on Instagram or wherever else, you can see lots of what other people are doing. And it's great. Really nice that people are thriving and doing different things. But, you know, you can be like, oh, I can't believe they've got more followers than us now. And actually, we're not in the followers business. We're in ticket sales and events. So there's that discipline. And I think, obsessing over what your customer wants, what is the gap in the market, what do people want, what will make them happy, what will improve their experience, is where you should obsess, not over your competitors. And also, you're competing with everything all the time. So, you know, it's not just about, oh, what about this other painting company? It's about, well, what about the cinema, the theatre? And all of those things are relevant competitors to us. People, and, you know, people that do this, you know, they're lovely middle class people. You know, they're not completely short of cash. They're people that have got money to do different things. Not that this is an elite pastime at all, but these people have got lots of things in their life that you're competing with. And so actually you can learn a lot. So, you know, what are the newspapers that people are reading? What TV shows are they talking about? You're competing with attention as much as anything else. And actually you can get a lot of really good ideas from these other places and learn quite a lot about people. And you just respond and you just focus on what they want. I think that's the key thing. That's my number one thing I would say to anyone who's starting a business. What's the need and what's the want, and focus on that.
And I think if people remember nothing else from this podcast, remember that, which is obsess over the customer, not the competition. Because you can get obsessed, as you say, over looking at the competition, but then your customers are kind of going elsewhere because you've not actually satisfied their need. You're just trying to do something that the competition are doing a little bit better. But if they don't need it to be any better, you actually don't have a customer. What I really like about your entrepreneurial approach is what you're doing is you're looking for inspiration from different places. You're looking to draw the parallels between things that don't necessarily look like they're connected on the surface. And then you're looking to say, okay, how can I take this inspiration from one place and bring it into another? Which brings us to where we are today, because obviously you started as a pop-up company, but now you've got your own space and you've kind of evolved. So how did that come about?
So that's a really good question, but you've just reminded me of something which, when I was doing my master's, was really interesting. It's really shaped how I think. So it was a Varieties of Capitalism module, which looked at, you know, what are the different types of capitalism across Europe and America, and what do they look like, and how do they work? And it basically broke capitalism into basically 2 or 3 different forms. There was liberal market economies like the UK and the US, coordinated market economies like Germany, and then social democratic market economies like Norway. And these places were all capitalist to an extent, but they had just completely different models of it, you know, wage bargaining or, you know, big financial markets, you know, completely different approaches and things. And what the literature talks about is institutional complementarities. which I think is really relevant to a small business as well,
Yeah.
where actually what works in Germany works because it's in Germany, because that particular thing is complementary to the other to the ecosystem around it. And I think that's the other thing, that when you're thinking about competition, actually there are some things which they look good when someone else does them because they complement what they're already doing.
Yeah.
But if you completely change direction, you've not got that complementarity. So I just wanted to drop that in there because that was one of my favorite things to read about. But more broadly, sorry, what was your other question? I've derailed us now. Was it about the pandemic?
Yes. How did you then go through pop-up?
Okay. Yes. So the pandemic was a horrific experience for loads of people, everyone. No one had a great pandemic. Although I was at a comedy night last night, and some of the lazy people had a great pandemic because they could just do what they liked, which I think was a joke. But I think the first thing to acknowledge was that, our business was really disrupted, but I didn't die. I wasn't seriously ill. Nobody that I was close to was seriously ill. I had a relatively good pandemic so far as one can. But it was very difficult. And I think particularly there were a lot of periods of uncertainty that were difficult. There was some comfort in full lockdown with furlough, that actually this is just completely out of my hands. I know what I have to do. It's not run events.
Yeah.
Great, nice and straightforward. But there were lots of periods where there was a lot of uncertainty. You couldn't plan. You couldn't plan that things would get better or they get worse. You just had no idea, and there was nothing you could do. So in January 2020, we'd had an amazing start to the year. February 2020, pretty good as well. And then early March, things get a bit wobbly. Bookings slow down, and March is historically one of our best months. Things slow down, cancellations, bookings drop, venues getting anxious, team getting anxious. And at this point, there wasn't a lot of information on what you should do or what the government would do to support you. And I think, definitely any review into the pandemic, there are things that the government could and should have done sooner and earlier. But that uncertainty, I think, was the really hard bit. It did give us some opportunity to pivot and do different stuff. So, online events, before Zoom fatigue wasn't a phrase when this started. We did free painting events on YouTube and on Instagram Live. So we live streamed them. We painted with thousands of people. It was quite fun. We started selling some art kits through a third-party supplier. And that worked, kept the brand alive. And then we thought, well, and so what was different? So when we did these live streams, they were free. They were just 45 minutes to an hour. They were just tasters, really. You couldn't do anything. There was no interaction in the same way, because it's really hard whilst you're live streaming on Zoom to then go into the comments on YouTube, which you can't actually see. And then I remember the first time we did it, it was horrendous. We also had, I think we were live streaming on Instagram Live on a little tripod as well. And the sound was just ricocheting between the speakers and the microphones. And it was just horrendous, just this horrible screaming. And someone sent us an email afterwards saying that was the worst thing I've ever watched. And I thought, oh, that's not very nice. It was our first time. And I did reply, and I said, well, we've never done this before. We're trying something different. If you've got any advice, let us know. And this person apologized, saying that they thought we were like this huge company that no one would ever read it. So I thought I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, oh, I'm sorry I ruined your afternoon. But so that was quite funny. The apology, I thought, oh, I've overdone it now. So yeah, there were these opportunities. We developed online parties, so taking as much of the social aspect of our events, but doing it on Zoom. It's not the same. It wasn't a substitute, but it was something that kept the brand alive. It's something we still do now. So for people who've got their offices still remote, or people that have got teams around the world, actually it's a really nice thing to do together. So, we send them art kits, they join us on Zoom, we spend an hour and a half painting, and it's, as good as it can be remote and on Zoom. So there were definitely opportunities, but not what we do forever. It wouldn't be sustainable that way. But there were definitely moments that were harder than others. And I think personally for me, the hardest bits were when things started to change, and they changed all of a sudden. And particularly when we had the tier system, and you were giving one message to your customers in Manchester, another message to your customers in Birmingham, another to London. And it's very hard when you've got a national Facebook and Instagram page to say three completely different things at once based on what the government was saying. Because, you know, it's either safe to run events or not, surely. But no, it turns out in some places it was, in some places it wasn't. Very hard to communicate. And your internal comms about, you know, right, we're shutting everything down, we're cancelling, or no, you can still go ahead. Very difficult. And there wasn't a lot of advice on like, well, what the hell do you do? Obviously there was, you know, wear a face mask, get vaccinated, great stuff there, but not for a business like ours. That was quite challenging, but it did force us to grow. So we had known that we wanted to open an event space of some kind that was revenue generating, and the pandemic made that a real necessity. So in 2019, we were running about 80 or 90 events a month at our peak, which was enormous, really a real operational, administratively expensive, hard thing to keep on top of, let alone the hours of working events and, you know, all of that. Very, very tough. And we were in 5 cities, you know, the different tiers, as I've mentioned. So we knew that we needed some fixed base that could essentially be revenue generating and just ease those operational pressures. So we had an office before. So we were in Leroy House in Islington. Great milestone. Getting your first office is great.
It's like buying your first house.
Exactly. It's like that, but you're renting instead. If we'd bought this office block, amazing. And then 2018, we moved into a WeWork in Liverpool Street, which was great. So it brought us closer to our corporate market. Yeah. And we were also able to run events in that WeWork in the co-working spaces out of hours, which was a nice thing that we managed to negotiate and agree. And so that was our test. Would people come to us, or did they only want to go to like a proper bar or restaurant? And people did come to us. So that was great. And, you know, we did some things slightly differently to what we do now. We had BYOB, which now is against the terms of our license. So that was a good experiment that people would come to us. So we knew that we wanted something like this. But with the pandemic, you know, really hard to keep your venue relationships alive. And we built up a network of 30 partner venues across London, great, in different places all the time, but, you know, they were regular partners. But, you know, we were in Tooting, Notting Hill, Canary Wharf, Hampstead, throughout central London. Quite, yeah. And it was so hard for lots of reasons to keep those relationships alive. A number of them went bust. Yes. Yeah. Which, you know, really sad. Great places, which otherwise were very viable businesses, but not when it's illegal for them to run and they've got no customers and government support was very limited. Yeah. So that was one aspect of it. The next was that you had management churn, which is something in hospitality and leisure you get a lot of anyway, where actually someone's a general manager now, but in 6 months is someone completely different, and also the entire bar staff have changed. That was very hard to keep on top of, and the pandemic really accelerated that. You know, people either moved home, they changed careers entirely, so that was quite hard to keep on top of. And then the last thing was just the lack of confidence from venues and from customers as well, that it was safe to run events. So our understanding of the guidance was that it was, and that we were fully compliant. But having groups of, you know, whatever size come in when you weren't directly in control, very difficult for a venue who's worried about being compliant. Yeah. Very difficult for them to be assured of that. So that was a real challenge. And that's one of the things that made us think, well, we have to open our own space now. It's operationally intense, popping up all the time. Yeah. But also with our dwindled network of partner venues, actually we need a hub that's central that we can bring people into. So we, as I said, we thought about opening a bar, a space for a couple of years before that. But then we got the keys to this place. It used to be a bank. And June 2013, I think it was the 25th of June, we opened our doors for the first time. And then we went from there.
Brilliant. I think it's firstly, it's a massive upgrade on a bank. If you are in London or you're visiting London, you should definitely drop by. You know, come grab a coffee, a cake, and cocktails. They are brilliant. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity to have a space. And it's still green, yeah. It's a fantastic opportunity to have a space and to do things with. Do you feel like that's changed your business a little bit? Because there's something kind of quite raw about having this pop-up space. I think there's this idea in entrepreneurship, stay scrappy. Do you feel like having a space has changed your business, and where do you see that going?
So that's a really good question. It's something that we've talked and thought a lot about, like, what is this business? Like, it's quite hard when people come in. So are you just a bar? No. You're just an events guy? No, we're both. And I think one of the things that we've come to the conclusion of, and I think particularly it's partly influenced by when we opened. So June 2000, what year? 2020, 21, June 2021, sorry. The city was pretty dead. People had started to come back. Lockdown had officially ended or was about to end, whichever way it was. And the city has remained quiet up until about now. October was busy and now it's busy. But most of the time that we've been open, High Holborn has been relatively quiet, nowhere near as busy as in 2019. And so, you can look at the space and think, well, I need a full bar. The bar today, we've got an event running. It's not full. The bar isn't full. That's fine. These things happen. We've had lots of nights where actually the bar is full and it's just completely different. And, I think the environment that we've been in, and also I suppose events gives you some perspective because you can see bookings in advance, which if you were a bar, you couldn't necessarily see in advance. So the place that we've arrived is that we're an event space with a bar, i.e. we focus on selling events. That brings people to the bar. Yeah. We're not a bar that happens to run events. Yes. And I think that's a subtly different, important, a bit like as a pop-up painting company, we are a social experience with painting. Yes. We're not a painting experience that happens to be social. Yes. So there's these little subtle nuances as to how we think about what we do. And it's really easy, I think, when you're in a space to obsess over it, or this is what you see is all there is. And actually, what's been really important to be reminded of is that, well, we're still in Birmingham and Manchester and Leeds. We're still running in other partner venues across London. So it's really important that we don't only think or talk about the bar. We run a national events company that happens to have a bar in central London as part of what it does, but it's not all that we do. And that's really important to remember. So, yeah, there's been a little bit of sort of resisting that because it is easy to get consumed by what you see. But otherwise, I think a lot of our ethos has stayed the same. We're a safe, relaxing space for people. The customer base stays the same. It's 80% women, enormously feminine space, essentially. The focus on the customer stays the same. It's not a serious art hub. It is a social space that is creative. That stayed the same. And then the ethos of, well, it's to have a good time. People are coming here to have a good time, to do something different. So I suppose it is forced us to double down on some of our distinct advantages or differences rather than undermine all of them.
And I really like the fact that you've got this clear vision. We are an events company that happens to have a space. And I really like that it comes back to, again, what we're talking about, the obsessing around the customer and setting that clear vision. There are things that you have to be dogmatic about, because otherwise you'll try to do so many different things, you'll never succeed. But then there are things that you have to be flexible on as well. You still got that identity of setting up the pop-up spaces. Could you imagine yourself having another hub in a different city?
Yeah, definitely. That'd be great. So yes, definitely. That is something that we've thought about. I think a lot of businesses like ours are probably in the same situation where, things are good right now. And if things carry on good, lots of things are possible. Yeah. But, what about the next COVID variant? That is a real dampener on planning. And it makes planning very difficult. And, planning is always imperfect. Things that are unexpected always happen. There are these black swan events. That's normal. But right now feels particularly difficult to see ahead. But yeah, I think it'd be really exciting. Opening a Manchester art bar would be great. Having a second one in London, that'd be great. And, there are loads of things that you could do where you could just give places their own personality and just diversify into all these different things. I think that'd be enormously exciting. So if anyone is listening with several £1 million, I'm open.
That's brilliant. I think what you've done with this space is brilliant. All the artwork that's around. Obviously, you guys can't see from here, but if you watch on YouTube and you'll see it all, I think it's brilliant. We've talked a lot about the business and the growth of the business, but a little bit less about you as a founder. So we'll take a bit of a handbrake turn and talk about you, because the event space, as you say, is notoriously busy, it's notoriously full on, and yet throughout this time you've also found time to do a master's. So how have you found coming into this space, and how have you managed it? Because it's a big gear change. University, business founder.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose I didn't have an approach. I just did it, and sometimes it was harder than others, and sometimes it was okay. I think one of the things that was difficult. So I was working full time on the business and did a full time masters at the same time, and then there was a general election, and oh my word, what a summer that was! That was a very intense 2017. Um, I think that what was hard was shifting activity rather than shifting focus. So, writing a business plan, writing content to an extent, and writing, an essay, actually kind of similar. You're focused, head down, I'm going to write this, then I'm going to write that. I didn't find that too challenging. But what was difficult was sort of switching mental mode away from, okay, I'm in meetings, I'm having conversations with people, I'm in this very consultative stage. And then, now I'm focused and I'm really, head down focused. And now I'm at an event, I'm performing. And like these three things, switching between those was quite hard. But I think you'd find that if you were doing one thing or doing three, I think it's your concentration breaking and your activity switching. I think that was what was hard. And I suppose you get that, with like advice on multitasking, sometimes, and I've always struggled with getting on top of my emails and Instagram messages and stuff like that. And I spend a lot of time reading how to reply to things faster. But one of the pieces of advice is that just do it in the order that it is. The time that you spend filtering and reprioritizing things is an unnecessary transaction cost, essentially. And I think it's the same with sort of activity and task switching, where the effort of switching or filtering what you're doing is harder than just getting on with it and just going through it. So that was quite hard, but otherwise I found that it was quite pleasant, and it meant that I had a diverse life. I think if you're doing politics stuff, if you're doing business stuff, you probably quite like people. Oh, you don't have to, but often, you've got an interest in people, and meeting lots of people is, something that I've always liked doing. And, you basically just getting to know loads of people. And I quite liked that. That meant that I've rarely been doing just one thing at a time. So it meant that I could take a break from this, and now I'm doing something like this. And, sometimes you spread a bit too thin, but otherwise you're cross-fertilizing ideas, which I think, with what I said about, politics and business and their similar focuses, actually what works in an election campaign can work in a business campaign as well, and vice versa. So that it was helpful. It was nurturing.
I think if anybody hasn't listened to the first episode, we touched on a similar topic there with a lady called Nikki Watkinson, who's a writer. But for a large part of her writing career, she's also been working in McDonald's. And she said, actually, working in McDonald's has made me a better writer, because you get this headspace to be able to think, but also actually that switch of activity allows you to do the cross-fertilization, which is really the secret sauce to being an entrepreneur, because that is when the ideas come that form into successful businesses. How have you found, because we talked a bit on I think the first time we tried to record this, on working on the business versus working in the business. And these are really important things to be able to separate. And a lot of people, myself included, have struggled with that. How were you able to draw that distinction? Did it come naturally? Were there things that you had to learn along the way? Can you share a bit about your experience?
So it's a really interesting challenge. And I think the truth is, sometimes you can work on the business, and sometimes you have to work in the business, because if you don't, you'll go bust and you'll lose your home, and you have to. So I think I think there's this myth of starting a business that is really freeing, and you get all this independence. And actually, it's not that you've got no boss, it's that the needs of the business are your boss, because they have to be. So I think it's something that isn't talked about a lot, but I think a lot of people in small businesses can feel trapped. founders can feel trapped and stuck, and that, well, I can't give up. These people are dependent on me. They'll lose their jobs, etc. I think that's something, the desire to just run away, I think is something that a lot of people in business, particularly small businesses, founders feel, which isn't talked about very much. So I think it's something that should be talked about. I think it's a really interesting sort of challenge to grapple with. And I think it's, firstly, just to acknowledge it's normal to feel like that from time to time, and it's okay. You're not letting anyone down, and you can do it, and that's fine. But I think my approach has been, firstly, to just be really upfront about, well, what needs to happen right now. And so one of the things that has been fun, but also enormously difficult about things coming back to normal around now, is sometimes just so busy, like, well, I've just done that and I've not done my actual job, and actual in air brackets there. My actual job is being director of marketing and business development. But my job is also, if it needs to be done, is wash out the plates and all of the other stuff, or clean the paintbrushes. You have to do that. You can't not do that. Someone has to do it. And if not you, then who? And obviously you should have a big team around you. But, as things grow and then shrink, actually getting the right number of people in is, a real challenge. So I think that would be my first thing to say to someone, is that, do what you have to do, and if you can, get people in to help you with the things that aren't completely essential for you to do, but you still will have to chip in, and you should. I think that's one of the good things about being in person again, is that, well, people see that you're doing it too. And I think particularly in events, not always an enormously glamorous industry, but like, actually you should be seen to be doing the things you're asking other people to do as well. And then the second thing is, when you have got these windows of possibility, you've got to treat it like, well, if I don't do this, the house is going to burn down. I think one of the things that I read as well was about, if you're really busy, but there's a leak in the ceiling, you don't like, oh, I'm too busy to deal with the leak in the ceiling. There's a leak in the ceiling, deal with it right now. Or there's a fire, get out. You just like, well, the house is on fire, I have to deal with this. And, obviously, easier said than done in many circumstances. But I think if you can, it's a useful way to think about it. I think, if I had, I don't know, caring responsibilities as well as all of the other things, it would be much harder to do this. And unfortunately, I don't. So, that's a privilege and a luxury to an extent, that my time is less consumed than lots of other people are, but they manage, or, they get on with it. And I think sometimes, you don't manage, oh, I've just had a rubbish week, and that's fine. We all have rubbish weeks. But I think when you can get that headspace, you've got to set time aside for the business development, for the stuff that really is working on the business. And I think for events, one of the lucky things is, you might work long hours, but, demand is pretty predictable. So we very rarely do intense operational stuff on a Monday or Tuesday. So because of the industry we're in, there are some days of the week that lend themselves to business development and working on the business. Whereas, and what I do on a Monday or Tuesday is likely going to be quite different to what I do on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So that would be my advice. If you have got the time, carve it out and really have dedicated time.
I like that concept, because it's about looking for the patterns, right? That you've identified the patterns of Monday, Tuesday, and then you're going to have to do something different on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The same is true regardless of what industry you're in, which is there will be patterns, for example, even down to you as an individual, there'll be patterns in your energy. For example, you might be a morning person, and you know that the best time for you to work on the business, because it lends itself to how your head works at that time, is 5 o'clock in the morning. I am not one of those people, but, or you could be a night owl, right? And you know that that's the time that you work. So you do what you can to protect that window. And then I really like that idea of treat it like the house is on fire, because like you say, right, if it's broken and you have to deal with it, you have no choice, and somehow you get on with it. I really like that. And obviously you talk as well about having a team around you, and there's a big difference between being the co-founder, two co-founders who are in the business, on the business, beside the business, above the business, below the business, everywhere is the business, to, okay, now we have a team and we've scaled. That always comes with some growing pains. Can you share some of the things you've learned around bringing the team in, what that means for you as a founder, and what your experience has been?
Yeah, that's something that I think we've been really lucky. We've had really good relationships with people on our team. Lots of people that are with us have been with us for years and years and years, and that's really nice. We've got a real diehards on the team. And I think one of the things that takes some practice is knowing what is information that needs to be shared right now. And there are conversations that your directors, and there are 3 of us that are exec directors, the 2 co-founders, and then Ian, our finance director. There are conversations we have that aren't for everyone, and particularly through the pandemic, you're like, well, what the hell are we going to do? And you don't bring everyone in on those conversations straight away. But my approach is generally to be really transparent with people. I share the business plan with my marketing team, and that's important to me, that they know exactly what's going on and what the goal is. And there might be some contingency plans which are kept in a dark room in a vault, but generally, as transparent as possible. And I think one of the things when you're sort of stable, it's quite easy. But one of the things that's been a challenge here, I think in other places, as you grow, like there are some things that just don't neatly fit into anyone's ballpark, and like managing those relationships can sometimes be quite hard. Like, well, is that in this department or is it in this department? Is it in both? And I think there's that sort of like the problem of role conflict in a growing business is a really tough one. So the way that we work around that is that we bring people into conversations, and we bring people in early and at the end and in the middle as well. So there's a lot of sharing information. And I guess that goes back to actually, what information am I meant to be sharing? Because I think on the other side of that is information overload. So there are lots of things where I don't know about that. I don't want to know about that. And there was a time when I knew absolutely everything about the business, and I could pick it up again if I want. But now we've got different processes for handling deliveries of canvases than we did when I was doing that all the time 5 years ago. So I'm regularly asking my team, like, what do we do about this? And that's okay. I think there's an element of I'm not in control of everything, and that's fine. We trust you. Your systems are the systems, and I think not being proud about that is really important. And I think that's one of the nice things about us as a company, is that we're not really afraid of mistakes. Everyone feels embarrassed for 10 minutes, and you're like, well, that was stupid, wasn't it? Or exactly. We all make mistakes. We're like, I just don't know that. And I think that's part of our approach. Is like, I have no idea. It's a completely okay answer. We're not braggadocious about these things. And I think that's something that I think there's a little bit of something that I would encourage everyone to be okay with. Is it's okay if you look a bit stupid for a little minute and you don't know, or you've said something wrong and you realize, like, no, that's just stupid. I do that all the time, where I start with an idea and like, no, not that, I take that back. So reserve the right to drastically change your mind. Like, no, that's just stupid. So I think those would be that actually very important advice. That would be what I'd encourage for a growing team. Be frank that you don't know and you might be wrong.
I think this is really important advice, because where I think lots of small businesses that are growing get trapped is that the founder or co-founders still want to retain this control. And so then this conflict arises between, well, why don't you trust me? You hired me, why don't you trust me? And you won't tell me anything because you want this control. And it also ties back to what we said before around obsessing around the customer, because everything that ultimately the information that you're sharing and why you're sharing it is because it ties back to what the customer wants, which is why your business will grow, because they're going to come and buy more of that from you, or slightly different things related to that. There's a great book called The Mum Test, which is about how can you ask questions, how can you find out if your business idea is a good one, through asking questions that even your mum couldn't lie to you. And that's one of the things, which is if you ask even subconsciously leading questions, or you try to have too much control, it's a vanity project. And that's what I really like around what you've just said, which is this is not a vanity project. This is customer obsessed, transparent, trusting your team, and just being okay with letting that control, and with that, the pride, the ego, go. And obviously we've talked about growing, but what's next?
Yeah, well, and also I think one of the luxuries of what we do is that a lot of it doesn't matter. You know, it's really important that people have a good time. That's something we really care about. But like, there are lots of jobs you could do. If you do it wrong, you're going to really hurt someone, or something really bad is going to happen. If we drop the paint, we need to clean the floor. If when we're guiding someone through a painting, we get muddled and we have to start again, we'll look silly for 5 minutes. That's like the worst that can. I mean, now having our own space, you know, like there are worse things that can happen now. But like the core of what we do, the ceiling has collapsed. But like the core of what we do, the event side is like, oh well, that someone didn't like that didn't work. That's fine. It's not life or death at all. Which, you know, I think goes hand in hand with events where you're in slightly low status. You know, lots of people do lots of things that are very important. And actually, you know, it's just nice. And you know, so that's fine. But I think there is a relief there that a lot of what we do, if we do it wrong, won't matter in 2 weeks. And that's important. So you know, got to act with integrity, keep people safe. But beyond that, you know, there's not much that can really go wrong in any meaningful sense. Sorry, what was your other question? What's next? What's next? So we have got lots of different things that we're doing in the bar now. And this is, you know, is a big part of what our vision was for the space if we did open one. So we want all sorts of different creative things, different social things. So we've got like the London Philosophy Group coming in tomorrow, and they'll have an event. We have got a comedy night coming up at the end of February. Comedy and Crepes is what we've called it. It's an art laughs comedy night hosted by an artist and comedian called Varieties, and we've done one of those before. Really good fun. We've got talks about climate change and mythology and how we think about things, about women in classical music. We do some fundraiser quizzes. So one of the things that we did in our first year was we raised £1,000 for some different charities. We did one quiz for Refuge in October, the domestic violence charity. We did one for the National AIDS Trust and Stonewall in June for Pride Month. And it's really nice to be able to do stuff like that and actually have the space to do it. You know, it's much easier to do it, you know, when you've got the space for it. It's like, great, we'll do it. And, you know, you invite all of your friends and you're like, okay, right, I've seen my friends now. So that's a sort of thing that we've got more of. And I think the challenge is, again, going back to that, being cautious and planning. You can't put on too much. You know, you can only invite your friends to so many things before they're like, I've been here enough now. And yeah, that's that's the truth of actually how a lot of businesses grow is very close referrals. And that's how you get started. And, you know, it's not embarrassing at all. It is when they stop showing up. But other than that, so that's what's next, really. Gradually adding different bits and pieces on top. When you came in, I showed you our new Monet wall. So one of the things when we opened here, we had this wall, which is Van Gogh's Cafe Terrace at Night, but as a wallpaper. It's really lovely, really striking. It really is, you know, one of our favorite parts of the bar. And then recently we've added a Monet's Bridget Givany wall, and adding things like that are just a bit different, a bit of a feature, because, you know, this space, as you know, used to be a bank. There's a lot of white walls. It's blank, which is great. It's versatile. And, you know, the walls are not the feature. The socializing is. And I think atmosphere so much is to do with the people in the room as well as the decor, or even more so the people in the room. So, you know, adding little bits and pieces that make the space feel like it's full of character, which you can't do all of those things all at once. You have to just incrementally do it, particularly if you're like, oh, well, I mean, December was so bad for so many events and hospitality businesses, like, and actually that has sort of been the whole time we've been open has been like either crisis or on the edge of crisis. And that's not great for decorating and, you know, paying for decorating. So gradually adding bits and pieces, but I'm really excited. I think, again, hadn't ever seen myself doing events, hadn't seen myself having a bar. That was another huge plot twist. I didn't even drink until I was 21. So, you know, me at 15 thinking, oh, I'll have a bar. Really not at all. So I think there's lots of really exciting things that we can do. And yeah, I'll see what happens later this year and next year.
Brilliant. And I think this space is only going to continue to grow and get more exciting. And it is already a fantastic space with the limited time we've already had with it. So, guys, really encourage you to come down to the London Art Bar. You're in High Holborn, not far from Chancery Lane, between Chancery Lane and Holborn. It's a fantastic location. It doesn't matter if you're not arty. I'm not arty. The coffee will be brilliant. The cake will be brilliant. And the cocktails, I can vouch for, they are brilliant. Gareth, it has been such a pleasure to chat to you today. I hope that listeners at home have enjoyed. I'll include all the links to your social media, to your website. And guys, come on down and check it out.